Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who suffered in silence. At 34, she had perfected the art of hiding pain behind a gentle smile and quiet determination. Working as a night shift cleaner at St. Mary's General Hospital, she knew every corner, every shadow, and every sound that echoed through those sterile corridors after midnight. The cramping had started 3 days ago, but Sarah pushed through it like she did everything else in her life. As a single mother raising 2 young children, she couldn't afford to miss work. The hospital paid better than most cleaning jobs, and the night shift differential helped her stretch every dollar to cover rent, groceries, and her daughter's asthma medication. That Tuesday night began like any other. Sarah clocked in at 11 p.m., exchanged brief pleasantries with Maria, the evening cleaner, and gathered her supplies. The hospital felt different at night, quieter, more intimate somehow. The harsh fluorescent lights were dimmed in non-essential areas, creating pools of shadow that made the building feel almost peaceful despite the constant hum of medical equipment and the occasional emergency. As Sarah worked her way through the 3rd floor, methodically mopping floors and emptying trash bins, the cramping intensified. She paused outside room 314, gripping her cart handle tightly as a wave of pain washed over her. The discomfort felt different tonight, sharper, more urgent. She told herself it was probably just her period arriving early, complicated by the stress of working double shifts last week when her coworker called in sick. Dr. James Chan was finishing his rounds in the cardiac unit when he first noticed the woman in the hallway. She was leaning against her cleaning cart, one hand pressed against her lower abdomen, breathing slowly and deliberately. Something about her posture struck him as familiar. He had seen that particular way of holding oneself thousands of times in his 15 years as an emergency physician. It was the stance of someone trying to manage serious pain while maintaining composure. Sarah had been cleaning hospitals for 8 years, ever since her ex-husband left, and she needed stable work with benefits. She had developed a deep respect for the medical staff and an understanding of the delicate ecosystem that kept the hospital functioning. She knew which doctors were approachable, which nurses worked themselves to exhaustion, and which janitors had been there long enough to remember when the building was first constructed. The pain hit her again as she entered the East Wing hallway, this time accompanied by a warm wetness that made her stomach drop. Sarah quickly ducked into the nearest bathroom, her heart racing as she discovered blood, more than she had ever seen during a normal menstrual cycle. The bright red stain on her uniform pants told a story she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Fear crept up her spine, but Sarah's first instinct wasn't to seek help. Instead, she calculated. If she went to the emergency department, she would miss the rest of her shift. Missing work meant losing pay she desperately needed. It also meant explaining to her supervisor why she left her post, potentially jeopardizing her job. Sarah had seen other employees let go for less. She cleaned herself up as best she could, stuffed paper towels into her underwear, and returned to work. The bleeding would stop, she told herself. It had to. She had rent due in 5 days, and her son's school field trip permission slip required a $20 fee she had been saving for. The hallway on the 4th floor stretched endlessly before her as she pushed the heavy cart forward. Each step sent jolts of pain through her pelvis, and she could feel the makeshift padding becoming saturated. Sarah found herself moving slower, pausing more frequently to catch her breath and wait for the waves of cramping to subside. Nurse Patricia Williams was coming off a brutal 12-hour shift when she spotted the cleaning woman struggling in the hallway. Patricia had worked in women's health for 23 years before transferring to general medicine, and she recognized the signs immediately. The way the woman held herself, the pale complexion, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the cart. Patricia had seen it countless times before. Sarah's vision began to blur slightly as she worked her way down the corridor. She told herself it was just fatigue from the long shift, but deep down, she knew something was seriously wrong. The bleeding had increased, and the cramping now came in waves so intense they left her breathless. Still, she continued working, driven by a combination of financial necessity and a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs before her own. The hospital's night shift operated with a skeleton crew, creating an odd intimacy among the staff who worked those quiet hours. Security guard Michael Torres had been making his rounds for 12 years and knew most of the regular night employees by name. When he saw Sarah sitting on the floor beside her cart, ostensibly organizing supplies but clearly struggling, he stopped to check on her. "You okay, Sarah?" Michael asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. Sarah looked up, forcing a smile despite the pain etched in her features. "Just tired, Miguel. Long night, you know." But Michael could see the sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool hospital air conditioning. He had a daughter about Sarah's age and recognized the look of someone trying to tough out something serious. "You sure? You look pretty pale." "I'm fine, really," Sarah insisted, pulling herself back to her feet with obvious effort. "Just need to finish this floor, and I'll be done for the night." As Michael continued his rounds, he made a mental note to check on Sarah again. Something about her demeanor troubled him, but he also understood the complex dynamics that kept hospital employees working even when they shouldn't. Everyone needed their job, and everyone was afraid of being seen as unreliable. The bleeding was getting worse. Sarah could feel it soaking through the paper towels and beginning to stain her pants again. The cramping had evolved into something that felt like her body was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. She found herself leaning against walls more frequently, using her cart as support as she moved through her assigned areas. In room 428, Sarah had to stop working entirely as a particularly severe wave of pain brought her to her knees. She knelt beside the patient's bed, gripping the rail and breathing in short, shallow gasps. The elderly man sleeping in the bed stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Sarah was grateful for the darkness that hid her struggle. Dr. Chun had finished his paperwork and was heading to the break room for coffee when he encountered Sarah again. This time, she was sitting on the floor in the hallway outside the elevator, her back against the wall, and her knees drawn up to her chest. Her cleaning cart sat abandoned a few feet away. "Excuse me," Dr. Chun said gently, crouching down to Sarah's level. "Are you all right?" Sarah's eyes snapped open. She had been drifting, the pain and exhaustion making it difficult to stay fully conscious. "I'm sorry, doctor. I was just taking a quick break." "I'll move the cart." "No, please don't get up," Dr. Chun interrupted, noting the pallor of her skin and the way she held her abdomen. "I'm Dr. Chun from the emergency department. Can you tell me what's wrong?" The kindness in his voice almost broke through Sarah's carefully constructed walls. For a moment, she considered telling him everything about the bleeding, the pain, the fear that something was terribly wrong, but the greater fear of losing her job and being unable to provide for her children. Instead, she shook her head. "I'm just tired, and of a long shift." Dr. Chun had seen enough patients to recognize the signs of significant blood loss. Sarah's lips had a slight blue tinge, her skin was clammy, and she seemed to be having difficulty focusing. "Have you been experiencing any pain or unusual symptoms tonight?" Sarah's resolve began to crumble. The pain was becoming unbearable, and she could feel her strength ebbing away. "Maybe a little cramping," she admitted quietly, "but it's probably just my period." "How much bleeding have you experienced?" Dr. Chen asked, his medical training taking over despite the informal setting. The question hung in the air between them. Sarah looked into his concerned face and saw genuine care, not judgment or annoyance at having his night interrupted by a hospital employee. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to consider that she might actually need help. "More than usual," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty hallway. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "I think we should get you checked out. Can I help you to the emergency department?" Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Going to the ED meant leaving her post, meant her supervisor would be called, meant potential disciplinary action. But as another wave of pain crashed over her, she realized she might not have a choice. "I can't," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I can't lose this job." "My kids, your health is more important than any job," Dr. Chun said firmly but gently. "And I promise you, we'll figure out the work situation. Right now, I'm concerned about you." As Sarah struggled with the decision that could change everything, she had no idea that her quiet suffering in the hospital hallway was about to set in motion a chain of events that would not only save her life, but transform how the entire medical center thought about the people who kept it running every single day. Dr. Chun helped Sarah to her feet, noting how unsteady she had become. The short walk to the emergency department felt like miles as Sarah leaned heavily on his arm, stopping twice when the cramping became too intense to continue. With each step, Dr. Chun became more convinced that they were dealing with something far more serious than normal menstrual bleeding. "Let's get you into a room," Dr. Chun said as they entered the ED. The night shift nurse, Linda Garrett, looked up from her station with surprise. It wasn't unusual for hospital employees to seek treatment, but something about the doctor's urgent tone and the cleaning woman's obvious distress caught her attention immediately. Sarah found herself in trauma room 3, sitting on the edge of the examination bed while Dr. Chun gathered supplies for an initial assessment. The bright lights made her squint, and the antiseptic smell that she had cleaned around for years suddenly seemed overwhelming. She clutched the hospital gown they had given her, still reluctant to fully commit to being a patient rather than an employee. "Sarah, I need to ask you some questions about your medical history," Dr. Chun said, washing his hands at the sink. "When was your last menstrual period?" The questions felt invasive despite Dr. Chen's professional demeanor. Sarah had always been a private person, sharing details of her life only when absolutely necessary. "About 3 weeks ago," she answered, her voice still weak. "It was normal. Any chance you could be pregnant?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She and David had broken up 2 months ago after dating for 8 months. It had been her first serious relationship since her divorce 4 years earlier. The relationship ended when David decided he wasn't ready for the responsibility that came with dating a single mother. The possibility of pregnancy hadn't even occurred to Sarah, but as she counted back the days, her heart began to race for an entirely different reason. Maybe, she whispered, the admission feeling like a betrayal of the careful control she had maintained over her life. Dr. Chin's expression grew more focused. "We're going to run some tests, including a pregnancy test and blood work. I also want to do an ultrasound to see what's happening." As Linda prepared to draw blood, Sarah watched the crimson liquid fill the vials and felt a strange disconnection from her own body. This was her blood, her pain, her crisis, but sitting in the hospital gown under the harsh lights, she felt like she was observing someone else's emergency. The pregnancy test results came back positive within minutes. Sarah stared at the plastic stick in disbelief, her mind struggling to process the implications. "Pregnant." The words seemed to echo in her head as Dr. Chen explained that they needed to determine the cause of the bleeding immediately. "The ultrasound will help us understand what's happening with the pregnancy," Dr. Chun explained gently. "Heavy bleeding in early pregnancy can indicate several things, and we need to know which situation we're dealing with." Sarah nodded numbly as the ultrasound technician, Rebecca, wheeled in the machine. The gel felt cold against her skin as Rebecca moved the transducer across her abdomen, searching for answers in the grainy images on the screen. Sarah tried to read the expressions on their faces, looking for clues about her fate in their clinical detachment. "There," Rebecca said quietly, pointing to a small dark area on the screen. "But the bleeding suggests—" Dr. Chun studied the image carefully. "It looks like we have a miscarriage in progress," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "The pregnancy tissue is not developing normally, and your body is trying to expel it. That's what's causing the heavy bleeding and cramping." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Miscarriage. Sarah had never been pregnant since having her 2 children, both planned pregnancies that had progressed normally despite the financial stress of her marriage. This pregnancy had lasted only a few weeks, but the loss felt enormous, complicated by the knowledge that she had been unknowingly putting herself in danger by continuing to work. "Is she going to be okay?" Linda asked, noting Sarah's pale complexion and the way she seemed to be fading in and out of focus. Dr. Chin checked Sarah's blood pressure and found it lower than he liked. We need to get Enforce started and monitor her closely. She's lost more blood than I initially thought. As Linda worked to establish 4 access, Sarah felt the reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She was having a miscarriage in the hospital where she worked, being treated by doctors who had probably seen her cleaning their offices hundreds of times without really noticing her existence. The role reversal felt surreal and deeply uncomfortable. "Sarah, I need you to stay awake for me," Dr. Chin said, noting that her responses were becoming slower. "We're going to need to do a procedure to stop the bleeding. It's called a DNC, dilation and curettage. We'll remove the remaining tissue so your body can heal properly." The medical terminology washed over Sarah as she tried to focus on Dr. Chen's words. Procedure. Surgery. She thought about her children asleep at home, unaware that their mother was fighting for her health in the same building where she had scrubbed floors just hours earlier. Her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was watching them, expecting Sarah to return home at her usual 7 a.m. with donuts from the hospital cafeteria. "I need to call my kids," Sarah said suddenly, panic rising in her voice. "They'll be getting up for school soon, and Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't know. We'll help you arrange that," Linda assured her. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you stable." Dr. Amanda Foster, the on-call gynecologist, arrived within 20 minutes. Sarah recognized her from the hallways. Dr. Foster was one of the physicians who always made eye contact and said good morning when their paths crossed during shift changes. Now, Dr. Foster was studying Sarah's chart with the same professional focus she brought to all her patients. "Hello, Sarah Dr." Foster said, sitting down beside the bed. "Dr. Chen has filled me in on your situation. I know this is frightening, but we're going to take very good care of you." The kindness in Dr. Foster's voice finally broke through Sarah's emotional barriers. Tears began flowing freely as the weight of everything, the pregnancy she had never known about, the miscarriage, the fear of losing her job, the worry about her children, crashed down on her all at once. "I didn't know," Sarah sobbed. "I would never have kept working if I had known I was pregnant. I would never have risked." "This is not your fault," Dr. Foster said firmly, taking Sarah's hand. "Miscarriages happen for many reasons, and most of them are completely beyond our control. You did nothing wrong." As they prepared Sarah for the procedure, word began to spread through the hospital's night shift staff. Maria, the evening cleaner, had arrived early and learned from security that Sarah had been taken to the ED. Michael Torres, the security guard who had checked on Sarah in the hallway, felt guilty for not pushing harder when he sensed something was wrong. The procedure itself took less than 30 minutes, but for Sarah, it felt like hours. The anesthesia provided relief from the physical pain, but waking up brought a different kind of hurt. The cramping was gone, replaced by an emptiness that felt both literal and metaphorical. Dr. Foster explained that the surgery had been successful, that the bleeding had stopped, and that Sarah's body would heal completely with time and rest. "You'll need to take at least a week off work," Dr. Foster said as Sarah slowly became more alert in the recovery area. "Your body needs time to heal from both the miscarriage and the blood loss." The mention of time off work sent a new wave of anxiety through Sarah. A week without pay would devastate her carefully balanced budget. Missing that much work might also raise questions about her reliability, potentially putting her job at risk just when she needed it most. "I can't afford to miss a week," Sarah said, trying to sit up despite the nurse's protests. "I need to work. My kids depend on this job." Linda, who had stayed with Sarah throughout the night, exchanged glances with Dr. Foster. Both women had seen how hospital employees often struggled with the impossible choice between health and financial survival. They had also seen how the system sometimes failed the very people who kept it functioning. "Let's worry about your health first," Dr. Foster said. "We'll figure out the work situation." But even as Dr. Foster spoke those reassuring words, Sarah knew the reality was more complicated. Hospital policies were hospital policies, and good intentions didn't always translate to practical solutions for single mothers living paycheck to paycheck. As dawn broke outside the recovery room windows, Sarah watched the morning shift arrive for their day. Nurses, doctors, and support staff flowed through the hallways with the purposeful energy of a new day beginning. Soon, her supervisor would discover her abandoned cleaning cart and realize that Sarah had never completed her assigned areas. The questions would begin, and Sarah would have to explain why the reliable employee they counted on had suddenly become a patient requiring medical leave. Dr. Chin stopped by before ending his shift, checking on Sarah's progress and reviewing her discharge instructions. "I wanted to follow up with Dr. Foster in a few days," he said. "And, Sarah, please don't hesitate to seek medical care if you need it. What happened tonight could have been much more serious if you had waited any longer." Sarah nodded, understanding the implication. Her instinct to keep working through the pain had nearly cost her everything. The thought of what might have happened if she had collapsed alone in some distant corner of the hospital sent chills through her recovering body. As the morning progressed, and Sarah prepared for discharge, she had no idea that her night of quiet suffering was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose deep inequities in how the hospital treated its employees and ultimately lead to changes that would protect others from facing the same impossible choices she had confronted alone in that hallway. The hospital discharge process felt strangely impersonal for someone who knew every corner of the building. Sarah signed papers, received medication instructions, and listened to follow-up care explanations while wearing hospital scrubs since her uniform had been ruined by blood. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was leaving as a patient through the same door she had entered as an employee just 8 hours earlier. Dr. Chun had arranged for a taxi to take Sarah home, a small kindness that felt enormous given her exhausted state. As the car pulled away from St. Mary's General Hospital, Sarah watched the building shrink in the distance and wondered if she would ever feel the same sense of belonging there again. The place that had been her second home for 8 years now felt different, marked by vulnerability and uncertainty. Mrs. Rodriguez met Sarah at her apartment door with worried eyes and 100 questions. The elderly woman had raised 6 children of her own and recognized the pallor of someone recovering from a medical crisis. Without pressing for details, she helped Sarah into bed and assured her that 8-year-old Miguel and 10-year-old Sophia would be looked after until Sarah felt stronger. "Mijo, something happened at Mama's work," Mrs. Rodriguez explained to Miguel as she prepared breakfast. "She needs to rest for a few days, but she's going to be fine." Sophia, perceptive beyond her years, sensed the gravity of the situation immediately. She had inherited her mother's quiet strength and her father's analytical mind, a combination that made her acutely aware of their family's financial struggles. When Sarah finally emerged from her bedroom that afternoon, Sophia was waiting with a glass of water and a carefully drawn picture of their family under a rainbow. "Are you sick, Mama?" Sophia asked, studying Sarah's face with the intensity of a child who had learned early to read adult emotions for clues about their world's stability. Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I was sick, but the doctors helped me, and I'm going to be okay." "Will you lose your job?" Sophia asked, the question that had been weighing on Sarah's mind since she woke up in the recovery room. The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. At 10 years old, Sophia already understood the precarious nature of their situation better than most adults realized. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure out together, okay?" Meanwhile, at the hospital, word of Sarah's emergency had spread through the night shift community like ripples in a pond. Maria, the evening cleaner who had worked alongside Sarah for 3 years, felt guilty for not noticing signs of distress when they had exchanged pleasantries during shift change. Security guard Michael Torres replayed their conversation in the hallway, wondering if he should have pressed harder when Sarah insisted she was fine. Nurse Linda Garrett couldn't stop thinking about the stark contrast between Sarah's dedication as an employee and the system's inability to support her when she needed help most. During her lunch break, Linda found herself researching the hospital's employee health policies discovering gaps that seemed designed more for legal protection than actual employee welfare. Dr. Foster had been practicing medicine for 15 years, but Sarah's case troubled her in ways that went beyond the medical aspects. As she reviewed Sarah's chart, Dr. Foster realized that the same woman who had been emptying trash bins in her office for years had nearly died from a treatable condition because she was afraid of losing her job. The irony was both heartbreaking and infuriating. By Wednesday morning, Sarah's absence had been officially noted by her supervisor, Janet Morrison. Janet had worked in hospital administration for 12 years and prided herself on running an efficient housekeeping department. When she discovered Sarah's abandoned cart and learned about the emergency department visit, her first concern was coverage for the missed areas and the potential impact on the department's performance metrics. Janet's phone call to Sarah came at 2 in the afternoon, waking Sarah from a much-needed nap. "Sarah, I need to understand what happened last night. Leaving your post without notification is grounds for disciplinary action, regardless of the circumstances." The conversation felt like a knife twist in an already painful wound. Sarah explained about the miscarriage and the emergency surgery, providing medical documentation that Dr. Foster had insisted she obtain for exactly this purpose. But even with legitimate medical reasons, Janet's tone remained focused on policy violations and operational disruptions rather than Sarah's health and recovery. "You'll need to provide a doctor's note specifying when you can return to full duties," Janet said. "And we'll need to have a formal discussion about proper procedures for medical emergencies when you're back." After hanging up, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling more isolated than ever. The hospital she had served faithfully for 8 years seemed to view her emergency as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy narrowly averted. The message was clear: she was replaceable, and her value was measured only by her ability to perform her assigned tasks. Dr. Chun, however, had been having very different thoughts about Sarah's case. During his Thursday morning meeting with the emergency department staff, he brought up the incident as a learning opportunity about recognizing patients who might be reluctant to seek care due to employment concerns. "We need to be aware that hospital employees face unique pressures when it comes to seeking medical attention," Dr. Chun explained to the assembled medical staff. This woman worked for an hour with a serious medical condition because she was afraid of losing her job. That's a systemic problem, not an individual failure. The comments sparked a conversation that continued long after the official meeting ended. Nurse Linda Garrett shared her research about employee health policies, while Dr. Foster talked about the ethical implications of a system that made workers choose between health and employment. Other staff members began sharing similar stories they had witnessed, but never discussed openly. By Friday, an informal coalition of medical staff had begun forming around the idea that Sarah's case represented a larger problem requiring institutional attention. Dr. Foster, Dr. Chun, and Linda Garrett found themselves having lunch together, discussing what could be done to prevent similar situations in the future. "The hospital has excellent patient advocacy programs," Dr. Foster observed, "but we have no equivalent support system for employees facing medical crises. And the policies we do have seem designed to protect the institution rather than support the workers," Linda added. Sarah was afraid to seek help because she genuinely believed it could cost her everything. Dr. Chun had been researching employee health initiatives at other hospitals and discovered several innovative programs that addressed exactly the issues they were discussing. "Some hospitals have emergency funds for employees facing medical crises," he reported. "Others have modified their attendance policies to account for the unique stresses that healthcare workers face." Their conversations began attracting attention from other staff members who had witnessed similar situations over the years. Stories emerged about maintenance workers avoiding medical care, kitchen staff working through injuries, and security guards postponing surgeries to avoid missing work. Sarah's case had opened a door to discussions that had been overdue for years. On Saturday morning, Dr. Foster made an unprecedented decision. She called the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, at home to discuss Sarah's case and its broader implications. "Dr. Warren had built her career on operational efficiency and fiscal responsibility, but she had also entered medicine driven by a genuine desire to help people. "Elizabeth, I need to talk to you about a case that's been troubling our entire department," Dr. Foster began, launching into a detailed account of Sarah's experience and the subsequent discussions it had generated among the medical staff. Dr. Warren listened carefully, asking pointed questions about policies, procedures, and potential legal implications. As someone who had risen through hospital administration, she understood the complex balance between employee welfare and institutional needs. But as a physician, she also recognized the ethical problems Dr. Foster was describing. "What are you proposing?" Dr. Warren asked after Dr. Foster finished her presentation. "I think we need to form a committee to review our employee health policies and develop better support systems," Dr. Foster replied. Sarah's case could have ended in tragedy, and it certainly isn't the only one. We have a moral obligation to do better. The phone call ended with Dr. Warren agreeing to meet with the informal group on Monday morning. It was the first step toward what would become a comprehensive review of how St. Mary's General Hospital treated its employees during medical emergencies. Meanwhile, Sarah spent the weekend recovering slowly, physically, and emotionally. The cramping had subsided, but the grief over her lost pregnancy lingered like a persistent ache. She found herself thinking about the relationship with David that had ended so badly, wondering if things might have been different if she had known about the pregnancy earlier. Her children's presence provided both comfort and motivation. Miguel drew pictures of superheroes healing people, while Sophia helped with household tasks with a maturity that broke Sarah's heart. They were trying so hard to take care of her that Sarah realized how much her strength meant to their sense of security. Sunday evening brought a surprise phone call from Linda Garrett, who had gotten Sarah's number from the employee directory. "I hope you don't mind me calling," Linda said. "I wanted to check on you and let you know that some of us have been talking about what happened." The conversation that followed surprised Sarah. Linda explained about the discussions among medical staff and the planned meeting with administration. For the first time since her emergency, Sarah felt like someone was looking beyond her individual situation to the larger problems it represented. "You mean other people go through this too?" Sarah asked, realizing she had assumed her fears about seeking medical care were somehow unique or unreasonable. "More than you might think," Linda replied. "And that's exactly why we need to change things." As Sarah prepared to return to work the following week, she had no idea that her quiet suffering in that hospital hallway was about to become the catalyst for changes that would protect countless other employees facing similar impossible choices between health and financial survival. The Monday morning meeting in Dr. Warren's office felt like a turning point that Sarah couldn't have imagined from her hospital bed a week earlier. Dr. Foster, Dr. Chun, and Linda Garrett sat across from the chief medical officer, armed with research, stories, and a proposal that would fundamentally change how St. Mary's General Hospital approached employee welfare during medical crises. "I've reviewed the incident report and Sarah Martinez's case," Dr. Warren began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had navigated hospital politics for decades. "I've also looked into similar situations at other facilities. The patterns you've identified are unfortunately common throughout healthcare institutions." Dr. Foster leaned forward, encouraged by Dr. Warren's acknowledgement of the systemic nature of the problem. "We believe Sarah's case represents a critical opportunity to implement preventive measures that could save lives and improve our workplace culture." The meeting lasted 2 hours, covering everything from emergency leave policies to employee health education programs. Dr. Chun presented research on hospitals that had successfully implemented employee emergency funds, while Linda shared data on the correlation between employee reluctance to seek care and workplace injury rates. By the end of the discussion, Dr. Warren had agreed to form an employee welfare task force with authority to review existing policies and propose comprehensive reforms. The task force would include representatives from medical staff, administration, human resources, and, crucially, direct input from hospital employees like Sarah who had experienced the system's shortcomings firsthand. Tuesday marked Sarah's return to work, a transition fraught with anxiety and uncertainty. She arrived at the hospital 30 minutes early, hoping to ease back into her routine before encountering colleagues who might ask uncomfortable questions about her absence. The familiar smell of disinfectant and the sound of her cartwheels on the polished floors provided a strange comfort after a week of feeling displaced from her normal life. Her first encounter came with Maria, the evening cleaner, during the shift change handoff. Instead of the awkward questions Sarah had anticipated, Maria simply hugged her and said, "I'm glad you're okay, Hermana. We missed you." The sentiment was echoed throughout the evening as word spread quietly among the night shift that Sarah had returned. Security guard Michael Torres made a point of checking on her more frequently than usual, while maintenance supervisor Frank Rodriguez ensured her assigned areas were manageable as she recovered her full strength. But the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Dr. Foster appeared in Sarah's assigned wing around midnight, ostensibly making late patient rounds, but clearly seeking an opportunity to speak with Sarah privately. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Foster asked, noting that Sarah still looked pale, but seemed steadier than she had a week ago. "Better," Sarah replied honestly. "Thank you for everything you did. Dr. Chin told me you made sure I had everything I needed for recovery." Dr. Foster smiled, but her expression grew serious. "Sarah, I want to talk to you about something important. We're forming a committee to look at how the hospital handles employee medical emergencies, and I'd like you to be part of it." The request caught Sarah completely off guard. In 8 years of employment, she had never been asked to participate in anything beyond her cleaning duties. The idea of sitting in meetings with doctors and administrators felt both intimidating and surreal. "I don't understand," Sarah said slowly. "What would I do on a committee like that?" "You'd help us understand what it's like to be in your situation," Dr. Foster explained. "The policies we create need to reflect the real experiences of employees, not just administrative theories about what should work." As Dr. Foster explained the task force's mission, Sarah began to understand that her nightmare in the hallway might actually help prevent other people from facing the same impossible choices. The possibility that something positive could emerge from her suffering felt like an unexpected gift. The Employee Welfare Task Force held its first official meeting the following Thursday in the hospital's main conference room. Sarah found herself sitting at the same table where she had once emptied trash bins, now wearing her best dress and carrying a notebook filled with thoughts about employee perspectives on healthcare access. Dr. Warren opened the meeting by sharing statistics that shocked everyone present. Employee surveys revealed that 43% of hospital workers had delayed seeking medical care due to concerns about employment consequences. 27% reported working while experiencing symptoms they knew required medical attention. These numbers represent a crisis that goes far beyond individual poor decisions, Dr. Warren stated. They indicate systemic failures in how we support our workforce. Sarah's contributions to the discussion proved invaluable in ways she had never anticipated. Her insights about shift scheduling, supervisor relationships, and the financial pressures facing hourly employees revealed blind spots that medical staff and administrators had never considered. "When Dr. Chin found me in the hallway, my first thought wasn't about my health," Sarah explained to the group. "It was about whether missing the rest of my shift would affect my performance evaluation. That's a problem that goes deeper than any single policy." Over the following weeks, the task force developed a comprehensive package of reforms that addressed both immediate crisis response and long-term cultural change. The Employee Emergency Fund provided financial assistance for workers facing medical crises, while new policies guaranteed job protection for employees seeking emergency care during work hours. Perhaps most importantly, the hospital implemented mandatory training for supervisors on recognizing medical emergencies and responding with support rather than disciplinary concern. Janet Morrison, Sarah's supervisor, was among the first to complete the program, emerging with a very different perspective on her role in employee welfare. The changes weren't just theoretical. Within 6 months of implementation, 3 hospital employees had used the emergency fund to cover expenses during medical leaves, while the new crisis response protocols have been activated 8 times for workers experiencing medical emergencies during their shifts. Dr. Chen often reflected on how Sarah's case had changed his own approach to patient care. I learned to look beyond the immediate medical problem to the social and economic factors that might prevent someone from seeking help. He told colleagues during a medical conference presentation about the hospital's employee welfare initiatives. For Sarah, the transformation felt gradual but profound. The woman who had once suffered silently to protect her job found herself regularly consulted on policy questions affecting hospital employees. Her perspective, shaped by years of economic uncertainty and single motherhood, brought a practical wisdom to discussions that had previously been dominated by theoretical considerations. The task force's work attracted attention from other healthcare institutions, leading to speaking engagements where Sarah shared her story as an example of why employee welfare programs were both ethical imperatives and practical necessities. Standing before audiences of medical professionals and hospital administrators, she transformed her private nightmare into a public call for change. I bled quietly in a hallway for an hour because I was more afraid of losing my job than losing my life, Sarah would tell these audiences. No hospital employee should ever face that choice. The ripple effects extended far beyond St. Mary's General Hospital. The Employee Welfare Task Force model was adopted by 12 other hospitals within 2 years, while the emergency fund concept influenced healthcare worker advocacy groups across the country. Sarah's children watched their mother's transformation with pride and amazement. Sophia, now 12, wrote a school report about workplace advocacy that drew directly from watching her mother speak at conferences and meetings. Miguel, 10, announced his intention to become a doctor specifically to help people like his mother who got sick at work. The relationship between Sarah and the medical staff who had saved her life evolved into genuine friendships built on mutual respect and shared mission. Dr. Foster became a mentor who helped Sarah develop confidence in public speaking, while Dr. Chen regularly checked on her family's welfare with the care of an extended family member. 3 years after that terrible night in the hallway, Sarah received a promotion to lead custodial supervisor, a position created specifically to ensure employee perspectives were represented in operational decisions. Her office was located in the same wing where she had once cleaned floors, but now she spent her time developing training programs and support systems for the hospital service workers. The annual Employee Welfare Day, held each year on the anniversary of Sarah's emergency, became a hospital-wide event celebrating both worker safety and the changes that had emerged from one woman's willingness to transform her suffering into advocacy for others. Looking back, Sarah often marveled at how a night of quiet desperation had evolved into a movement that protected hundreds of workers from facing similar crises alone. The hallway where she had bled in silence became, in her mind, the place where her real life began, not just as a survivor, but as someone whose voice mattered in conversations about dignity, healthcare, and the value of every person who kept the hospital running. The lockdown that the hospital had effectively gone into for her, not the physical kind, but the institutional examination of conscience that followed, had revealed systemic problems that required systematic solutions. Sarah's emergency had forced everyone to acknowledge that the people who cared for the building also deserve care when their own bodies failed them. On quiet nights, when Sarah now walked those same hallways in her supervisory role, she sometimes paused at the spot where Dr. Chun had found her sitting against the wall. The memory no longer brought only pain. It carried the satisfaction of knowing that her suffering had meaning, that other women would never have to choose between their health and their children's security because of changes born from her crisis. The transformation was complete, but the work continued. Each new employee orientation included Sarah's story as a reminder that seeking help was not weakness but wisdom, and that the hospital's mission to heal extended to every person within its walls, not just those lying in the beds, but those who clean the rooms, secure the corridors, and kept the institution functioning through dedication and quiet strength.